Hi, it's Ramsey Dewey at the JX Fight Club in Shanghai, China, and we have another question from our friend Pavi, who is a bodybuilder, a boxer, and also practices Taekwondo. And it's a two-part question again, which is essentially, why have I never seen a really muscular Taekwondo player with like a bodybuilder type of physique? Whereas in boxing, you'll often see very muscular boxers. You can see their muscle tone. A lot of them look like bodybuilders. If you look at guys like Mike Tyson, he had those big, giant hamstrings, big old quads on his legs, and really muscular, fit-looking guy. But when you look at the average Taekwondo player, why don't you see that kind of musculature, that type of imposing strength? Okay, and the second part of the question is, why is boxing so brutal and Taekwondo is so soft? Because if you watch a boxing match, it's a lot of brutal action. There's a lot of hits, knockouts, cuts, concussions, damage being done. Whereas Taekwondo, the players are often much more careful, and we don't see so many knockouts. Okay, now let's address that first question. Why don't we see very many big, strong, muscular Taekwondo players, but we often see big, strong boxers? Now, obviously, not every boxer looks like a bodybuilder. I mean, there are weight classes. We've got straw weights, atom weights in boxing, the teeny tiny guys, right? And then we've got heavyweights who tend to, pack on that muscle, right? Whereas in Taekwondo, we tend to have long, lanky guys who are skinnier. And, I come from a Taekwondo background. I'm a long, lanky guy with long arms and long legs, and not a super imposing, giant, muscular physique. I'm just long and lanky. And I think I gravitated toward the sport of Taekwondo specifically because of that, because it's the sport of kicking. And if you have really long legs, that's a big advantage in Taekwondo. I also think a big part of that is that traditional martial artists are terrible athletes. I've made a few videos about this. And yeah, I know a lot of you are getting mad about this. You're thinking, no, I'm a good athlete. But stop. Honestly assess yourself for a minute if you fall into that boat. Right? A lot of traditional martial artists, compared to athletes in other sports, simply do not pay attention to their physique, their athleticism, their strength, their explosiveness, their agility, like other athletes do. And if you look at the way professional football players in the NFL, for example, they train, right? Some of these guys have amazing leg speed. You see them like running those agility ladders and doing all these agility courses, and they're in the weight room constantly trying to get as big and strong as possible. But if you look at the way Taekwondo players train, and it's all about the technique. And again, a lot of this has to do with the rules. In Taekwondo, I haven't read the official rules for a while, so it might have been updated since I was competing decades ago. But you score 1 point for a kick to the body. No punches are allowed to the head. You score 2 points for a kick to the head. Okay? If you want to score a point with a punch, which is very rare, it has to be very audible, loud, and noticeably knock your opponent back. And so we don't see a lot of punches or hand strikes in Taekwondo because it's a very risky move with that rule set where you're not allowed to strike the head. All right, obviously no knees at all, no kicks below the waist. So your targets are the torso and the head predominantly with your kicks. Okay? You score an extra point for a knockdown, you score an extra point for an aerial technique, and a knockout is an automatic win. A 7-point lead is an automatic win. Now the rules we give fights, that really changes the dynamic. Now, yeah, I know knockouts are a viable way to win a Taekwondo match, and so you might think, why don't we see all these great knockout artists in Taekwondo? Now there are some guys who are really good at doing that, right? If you just Google like Taekwondo knockout highlight reel or something like that, you can find all kinds of compilations from a bunch of Olympic events where you do see knockouts. But again, that's the exception, not the norm. See, most Taekwondo matches are won by points, either that 7-point lead, if one of the Taekwondo players has a largely advantageous skill set, or just a close decision. Now, a lot of times you'll see Taekwondo players, again, they fight very careful. They've got the hands down. Again, they're feinting. They're well out of their opponent's kicking range when they do have the hands down, generally, the good ones anyway. And again, it's a game of feinting and drawing and feinting and drawing. And so again, they're being very careful using their most ranged weapons, the kicks, the long distance kicks. Okay, whereas in boxing, what does boxing reward us for? Well, it's different from amateur to professional. In amateur boxing, they're largely scoring who throws and lands the most punches. Whereas in professional boxing, it's largely who does the most damage. Okay? Now, if we're looking at professional boxing and you're being scored on who does the most damage, well, obviously, we're going to see a brutal sport versus a sport where you can win on points and points alone if you just get a lead. So you can be really careful and touch the guy 7 times with your feet, even if you don't actually inflict any damage on him, and you can win, or throw like a whole chain of butterfly kicks or something really fast and up the scorecard. Yeah, there's a big motivation not to risk damage in Taekwondo to yourself by playing it safe, whereas in boxing, there's nowhere safe in a boxing ring. Okay. Now, I recently judged a MMA event in Beijing. It was China's first women's only, all women's mixed martial arts event. It was pretty cool, but the judging parameters were kind of weird. All right, the scorecards were kind of weird in my opinion, specifically because the judges were supposed to score a takedown the same as takedown defense. So, if a fighter shoots in for a takedown and gets the takedown, they score on the scorecards for that. But if I shoot for a takedown and my opponent stuffs that takedown and I don't complete the takedown and we end up back on our feet, my opponent scores exactly the same. And the reason I don't like this particular scoring system is because it encourages people not to attempt takedowns. Because essentially, if you fail the takedown, even if it doesn't put you in a bad situation, you lose points. So anytime we start favoring points in a scoring system over damage, we change it from a fight into a game. I love Jack Dempsey's book, which I quote all the time, Championship Fighting. It's awesome. Go look it up. And he gives a scathing critique of the modern boxing gyms that he was writing about in the 40s and 50s. Again, modern, compared to when he was in his prime back in the early 1900s. Okay, and he said modern boxers, their big problem is they play it as a game. They're trying to score points. And they don't really know how to defend themselves. They don't really know how to fight. They know how to go out there and tag each other with their gloves, but they don't know how to fight. And a big part of that problem that Jack Dempsey encountered was, again, the scoring system, because that stuff changed over time. Right, the way boxing is regulated and scored, the gloves they use, the rule system that they have today is very different than what it was 100 years ago. And because of that, again, the sport has changed and evolved in a lot of different ways. Because of that, you watch, Floyd Mayweather does not box the same way as Jack Johnson did 100 years ago. And for good reason, they fought under different rule sets. In Jack Johnson's day, again, they didn't separate the clinch. They really didn't. You could clinch and infight and do dirty boxing all you wanted. And so it was a lot of hand fighting, a lot of clinch fighting. You watch those old Jack Johnson videos, and man, it almost all the boxing happened inside the clinch. It was all hand fighting and clinching, right? But you watch guys like Floyd Mayweather and a lot of the modern boxers, it's all outside the pocket, throwing those long, ranging, jabs and straight punches, and really reaching and putting distance in between the two fighters. I'm not saying one is better than the other. It's just that the different rule sets dictate the action. So again, if you gave boxing, a rule set similar to Taekwondo. For example, if you punch the guy 7 times and get a 7-point lead, like 1 point for a punch to the body, 2 points for a punch to the head, something like that, you know, we wouldn't see a lot of knockouts. We'd see boxing matches determined almost entirely by points. You know, it would turn into a game of tag. You know, even if we still kept the knockout rule that you can win by knockout in the game, right? It would turn into a game instead of a fight, if you will. And again, even I would say any combat sport has the potential to turn into a game when we add more and more rules to it, or if we milk the rules, if we play the system, game the system, right? Now, the second part of your question, let's see. Hold on, did I answer both questions? The bodybuilder physique versus the tendencies for brutality? I think I might have. But you know, every now and then we will see a guy in Taekwondo who doesn't really fit the mold, who isn't like that long, lanky type. Like take Joe Rogan, for example. He was an American Taekwondo champion before he became famous as a comedian and as the UFC commentator. And if you look at his physique, you know, he's very stocky, he's very big. He doesn't have the super long legs that we usually associate with a Taekwondo player. But, you know, his Taekwondo is phenomenal. It's great. I mean, you can see these videos of Joe Rogan throwing these amazing back kicks and throwing better kicks than Georges St-Pierre. And, yeah, he goes against that mold, and I think a big part of what made him good is that he actually did have that all that extra muscle. Now, a lot of people will argue that extra muscle will slow you down, and you know, that's not necessarily true. Now, if you train strictly as a bodybuilder with the goal of hypertrophy and nothing but, and you never work cardio and you never work kicks, and then you get in a ring and fight, you're going to be a terrible fighter. But if you train to get big muscles and at the same time, you know, you train for strength and explosion and agility and speed and technique and all that good stuff, you're going to get into the ring and you're going to do awesome. Okay? So it's all a matter of how we train. So again, thank you for the question. I hope that answered it. Thanks for watching. Now get out there and train.